In the heart of Salt Lake City stands a gleaming headquarters. Behind its walls, a financial empire quietly operates, one that most people have never heard of. While world religions like Islam, Christianity, and Judaism are widely recognized for their spiritual teachings, few realize that one American religious movement has quietly accumulated wealth that rivals some of the world's largest corporations. We're talking about approximately $150 billion. Yes, you heard that correctly. But here's the question that haunts researchers and journalists. Where exactly does all this money come from? And more importantly, where does it go? Today on Soulway, we're pulling back the curtain on one of the most fascinating and closely guarded financial stories of the modern era. Welcome back to Soulway, the channel where we explore the intersection of faith, history, and society with depth and integrity. Whether you're here for the first time or you're returning after watching our previous documentaries, I want to extend a genuine invitation. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. By subscribing, you'll join a growing community of thoughtful people who want to understand the world's greatest institutions. Not with cynicism, but with curiosity and respect. Now, before we dive deeper, I want to be clear about something important. What we're discussing today is not an attack on faith itself. Rather, it's an examination of how wealth, institutions, and belief systems intersect in ways that shape our world. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, secular, or exploring your own path, understanding how major institutions operate financially is something we should all care about. So, I'm asking you in advance, keep an open mind, watch until the end, and share your thoughts in the comments. What will you discover by the end of this video that surprised you? I genuinely want to know your perspective. Let's begin. To understand the wealth of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly known as we need to rewind to 1830. A young man named Joseph Smith claimed to have received divine revelations and founded a movement that would eventually reshape American religious landscape. What started as a small group of believers in New York would eventually migrate westward, facing persecution and expulsion at every turn. By the time they settled in the Utah Territory in the mid-1800s, something remarkable happened. They built an entire civilization from scratch. Here's where it gets interesting. Unlike most religious movements that rely primarily on donations from individual members, the early Mormon Church did something different. They became entrepreneurs. Church leaders invested in mills, farms, stores, and trading posts. They didn't just preach about prosperity, they created it through business. By the early 1900s, the church had accumulated significant landholdings and businesses. But here's the crucial turning point. In 1959, something changed. The church began what insiders call the Great Withdrawal. What do you think this means? Take a guess in the comments below. I'll reveal the answer in just a moment. The church began systematically moving away from visible business operations and consolidating wealth into a massive, secretive financial structure. By the 1980s, they had created a labyrinth of holding companies, investment funds, and financial entities that would make even the most sophisticated Wall Street firm jealous. And here's the kicker, most of it remained hidden from public view for decades. Now, let's talk about the engine that powers this financial empire, tithing. In mainstream Christianity, giving to the church is typically voluntary and uncapped. But in the Mormon Church, tithing is mandatory and comprehensive. Members are expected to give 10% of their gross income, not net income, but gross to the church. Let me put this in perspective. If the church has approximately 16 million members worldwide, and even if we conservatively estimate that only 30% actively tithe and average their income at roughly $40,000 annually, we're looking at billions of dollars flowing in every single year. But wait, there's more. In addition to tithing, the church also collects donations for specific projects: building temples, missionary work, humanitarian efforts. Members also pay for religious education, temple garments, and various administrative fees. Over a lifetime, a devoted member might contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars to the institution. Here's a thought-provoking question. How do you think a religious institution justifies keeping such enormous wealth private? In the comments, share whether you believe religious organizations should be more transparent about their finances. The church's official position is that these funds are being used for humanitarian work, temple construction, and spreading their message. And to be fair, they do engage in substantial charitable work. But the scale of wealth accumulation far exceeds what most members realize or what is publicly disclosed. In 2019, a major whistleblower, a former church financial manager, leaked documents revealing that the church had accumulated over $100 billion in what they call the Church Allocation Fund, separate from humanitarian and missionary budgets. The church's response was essentially that these funds were their own business and entitled to privacy. This sparked a genuine crisis of conscience for many members. The diversification strategy. Here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. The Mormon Church doesn't just sit on piles of cash, they invest it extensively. Through a complex web of subsidiaries and holding companies, the church owns stakes in everything from real estate developments to technology companies. They own vast agricultural lands, commercial properties in major cities, and have invested in stocks and bonds through various investment vehicles. One particularly interesting investment, a real estate development company that built an entire city called City Creek Center in downtown Salt Lake City. This wasn't a humanitarian project, it was a luxury retail and residential complex. Members' tithing money directly funded a shopping mall. Now here's the nuance. The church argues that all profits from these ventures eventually go back into their mission work. But think about this, shouldn't members have transparency about how their sacred donations are being used? Especially when they're being used to build shopping centers? The church also operates Brigham Young University, one of the largest private universities in the United States. The institution receives substantial church funding, but also operates as a massive financial entity in its own right. BYU's endowment and investments represent another significant pool of wealth tied to the church ecosystem. But here's the real turning point in our story. In 2018, something unprecedented happened. The church published a newsroom article essentially admitting that they had substantial financial reserves. Their actual words. This was shocking because for decades, they had avoided making such admissions. Why the change in transparency? Likely because the 2019 whistleblower leak was already circulating in digital channels, and getting ahead of the narrative seemed strategically wise. Yet even this admission was vague. They didn't provide actual numbers. They didn't break down where money was invested. They simply acknowledged having money, which most members already suspected, but never had explicitly confirmed. The theological paradox. Now, here's where our exploration becomes deeply philosophical. And this is important regardless of what faith you follow. The Mormon Church teaches principles of humility, charity, and community service. In their scriptures and teachings, they emphasize helping the poor, caring for the vulnerable, and building Zion, which they define as a community united in righteousness and purpose. Yet, here's the paradox that many scholars have noticed. An institution teaching sacrifice and charity while accumulating unprecedented wealth creates a profound theological tension. This isn't unique to the Mormon Church. Throughout history, many religious institutions have faced similar critiques. The Catholic Church's vast art collections and real estate holdings. Islamic foundations controlling enormous endowments. Jewish organizations managing multi-billion-dollar funds. These are complex questions that every major faith tradition grapples with. But what makes the Mormon situation particularly interesting is the level of secrecy combined with the doctrinal emphasis on transparency and honesty. One of their core teachings is that honesty is a principle of salvation. Yet the church's financial practices have historically been, let's call it what it is, opaque. Here's my question for you. Can a religious institution maintain moral authority while keeping its finances hidden? I genuinely like your perspective. Comment below. Some church members argue that the wealth accumulation is justified as long-term planning for the faith's survival and expansion. Others feel betrayed that their sacred donations have funded commercial ventures rather than purely charitable work. This internal tension has led to what scholars call a crisis of trust among portions of the Mormon membership over the past decade. A notable consequence: membership growth has slowed and exit rates have increased, particularly among younger members who have access to information about the church's financial practices and question whether their tithing aligns with their values. The global implications. Why should those outside the Mormon Church care about this? Because it raises crucial questions about religious institutions in the modern world. In most Western countries, religious organizations receive significant tax benefits. They're exempt from property taxes, income taxes, and often from financial disclosure requirements that secular corporations must follow. The Mormon Church benefits enormously from these privileges. We're talking potentially billions in tax exemptions across their real estate holdings alone. This creates an interesting situation. Public funds through foregone taxes essentially subsidize the wealth accumulation of private religious institutions. The same applies to other major religions, but the scale and secrecy of Mormon finances make it a particularly illuminating case study. Moreover, as the church expands globally, particularly into developing nations, the financial dynamics become more complex. In countries where average incomes are much lower, the 10% tithing requirement represents a substantially heavier burden on members. Yet the accumulated wealth goes primarily to church headquarters in the United States. This raises a critical question about equity and fairness in global religious movements that we rarely discuss openly. The Mormon Church's financial empire is also changing. In 2020, they underwent significant organizational restructuring, consolidating some of their visible business operations. Why? Likely because transparency pressures were mounting and maintaining a separate business empire was becoming untenable in an age of digital information and accountability. It's a reminder that even the most powerful institutions are not immune to the forces of transparency that the modern world demands. So, here's what we've discovered today. The Mormon Church has accumulated extraordinary wealth through tithing, investments, and business ventures, wealth that dwarfs what most members realize. This wealth has historically been kept secret, protected by a complex financial architecture and a culture that discourages questioning leadership decisions. But this story isn't really about attacking Mormonism. It's about asking important questions that apply to every major institution, whether religious, corporate, or governmental. How do we balance power with accountability? Wealth with justice? Institutional survival with individual conscience? These are questions that thoughtful people, regardless of their faith, must wrestle with. As you leave this video, I want to invite you to reflect personally. Whether you're Mormon, Muslim, Christian, or exploring your own path, consider: what role should transparency play in institutions you support? What questions deserve to be asked without fear of judgment? If this video resonated with you, please subscribe to Soulway. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming explorations into faith, power, and society. And I'm asking directly, what surprised you most in this investigation? What questions do you still have? Thank you for watching. This is Soulway. See you next time.